Guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be getting into my 2024 to 2025 NFL season predictions video, where I just give all my standings for each and every team going into this season from what I predicted. And also, this will be my last video for 2 years. So if you are a follower of mine and have been watching my channel for a while, just so you know, I am going on a 2-year mission where I'm abandoning or I'm leaving behind some of these other things. So I will not be making videos during that time, but I will be back in a couple years. So this will be my last video. Just wanted to get out my NFL predictions for you guys here. All right, but let's get into this here. A lot of ads on this website, so you're just gonna have to bear with me on that one. I'll try and exit out on them each and every time. But let's look at my standings here. In the AFC, we got a new number 1 seed heading into this year. I got the Kansas City Chiefs finishing at a 12-5 record. I just think Patrick Mahomes will do what he does. This Chiefs team, I think, honestly got better than what they were last year. Last year in the regular season, they weren't the greatest team. I think they're a better team than that. So heading into this year, I think Mahomes, I know they lost their cornerback, forgot his name, but he's slipping my mind. But you know who I'm talking about. But signed Chris Jones. They had a good draft. I think they should be just fine. Then number 2, I got Joe Burrow and the Bengals actually winning the AFC North. And let me just say, the AFC North was very hard to predict. There's a lot of good teams in this conference. I wound up going on the Bengals, though, with their schedule to get it done. I think they are. It's tight between the Ravens and the Bengals, but I think they definitely have the case to be the best team in that conference. But yeah, I think the Bengals have a really good chance with Joe Burrow this year, if he stays healthy, to be one of the best teams in the NFL. And then number 3, we got the Texans, 11-6. Texans obviously had a good off season. Most notably getting Stephon Diggs, improving that defense as well. I think D'Amico Ryans and CJ Stroud and this Texans team is going to take that next step this year. They get a 3 seed, have a good record at 11-6. I think that's a pretty good year for Houston, and this is not a very easy conference, I think, with the Jags and the Colts up there. Good teams as well. All right, 4 seeded, we have the Jets just barely winning out this division with Aaron Rodgers. I'll get to what happened with the Dolphins in a minute, but Jets barely squeak this out. Aaron Rodgers, I think, will have a good year, and we know how good this defense is year in and year out. I don't expect the defense to be any worse this season. Then we have the wild card teams. We got the Ravens, who were the 1 seed last year. They are the first wild card team to make it this year. At 11-6, I expect another good year from Lamar Jackson, but this team did lose some pieces on the defensive end, as most notably being their defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald. I think that's going to be big for the Ravens this season, as we're going to see some setbacks. I think last year they were just a really good team. I don't think they'll be quite that dominant. I still think they'll be a very good team with Lamar, and obviously adding Derrick Henry will help the run game. But I do have the Ravens as a 5 seed right now, just barely missing out on that division. And then we got the Colts as a 6, 10-7. Colts, I really like Anthony Richardson heading into this year if he can stay healthy. I know we got injured, but when he was playing, he was very good. And I think if the Colts can have that Anthony Richardson that we saw earlier, this could be a very good team. I think their wide receiver core is very solid. The O-line's been much improved from past Colts team we've seen. Their defense is pretty solid as well. So you just look at the Colts overall. They were a team that almost made the playoffs last year with Gardner Minshew as a QB. I think they take steps this year, and honestly, almost get it over the Texans as the winner of the division. The Texans just win it out by a game, but yeah, the Colts, good team, I think, this year. And then the Dolphins, who were on the lead of the division just like they were last year, they do wound up losing out on the division. We're actually started out the year 5-0 in my predictions and kind of, obviously went 5-7 the rest of the way, which isn't great. So I'm interested to see what happens with the Dolphins this year. I think Tua, it's a contract year for him. He has to step up, especially in this postseason. This would be a very difficult matchup if they had to play the Bengals in the first round. But yeah, it's a tough AFC. Who knows if they even make the playoffs, but they have a very good offense around them. I think their defense very much, though, is in question, especially that D-line with all the pieces they lost, but still a good team. And then I'm going to kind of just rip through some of these teams here as we get to the bottom. I do want to shout out the Steelers. Another team who kind of choked. I believe they were like 9-4 at one point and ended up the year very poorly, as you can see. But because they have a tough schedule to end out the year. But I really like Russell Wilson and this Steelers team. If Russell Wilson's the starter, this defense is very good. We know Mike Tomlin's are always in it. I just don't see him quite making it with these tiebreakers. But it's going to be a tight race. I could see all these teams up here flipping it out as the season goes on. And then we do have a disappointment with two of these teams, the Bills and the Browns, both missing out. Bills, this is a year that kind of a little bit of a rebuild, honestly, here for Buffalo. Rebuilding the team around Josh Allen. I don't think Josh Allen's going to have enough this season to carry this team to be the top of the top. I think they do wound up being at a 9-8 mark, and in the AFC, that's not enough to make the playoffs. Then we have the Browns finishing 9-8 as well. Deshaun Watson, just so many unknown variables with the QB position. I don't think they'll be as good last year on the defensive end of the ball. That does wound up getting at 9-8. But I do like that roster still. I think it's a good team. I think they're well coached, but just don't know about them making the playoffs again this year. And then we have Chargers with Jim Harbaugh's first year. I think they still have a lot of work to do, very similar to the Bills around that team. I don't think they'll be quite as good, but Justin Herbert alone, as well as a good coach, and Jim Harbaugh, I think is enough for this team to win a lot of games. 8-9 is not a bad record. I mean, it's not great either, but... And then we have 12, the Jaguars, 8-9 as well. Probably a disappointment for the Jags, but that's how I see their season ending up with Trevor Lawrence. Still some work to do on that defense, or on that O-line especially. The defense is pretty solid, but I just don't know about Doug Peterson and the Jaguars heading into this year, especially after the way that last season ended. And then we have the Raiders at 7-10. Gardner Minshew, I think, will make this team competitive, but not enough for them to really be in the mix for the playoffs at all. And then the Titans finish at 4-13. Not a good year for Will Levis, and that O-line is atrocious in my opinion for Tennessee. Plus losing a lot of valuable pieces on the defensive end of the ball and Derrick Henry. I know they improved their roster at some points, but I just don't know about that Titans team. They'll probably be better than 4-13, but for the sake of this video, I do have them going 4-13. Then the Pats and the Broncos both finished 3-14. Both very big rebuilding years for those teams. All right, but let's get to the NFC side of things now. And starting out with the 1 seed. From a couple years ago, we do have the Eagles finishing at the 1 seed with a 12-5 record. Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, I think, have a bounce-back year. They reshaped that coaching staff a bit. I think they do bounce back. That defense is very good. They obviously had, in my opinion, the best draft of this year. So with the pieces they got, especially at the defensive back, improving that side of the ball, it's going to be a good Eagles team. And I do think they're the best team in that division. I think they will come out on top of it when it's all said and done. But then number 2, we got the Lions also finishing 12-5. Big extension of Jared Goff recently. I like the Lions quite a bit. I mean, they have a good defense. Improved with drafting Terrion Arnold and made some moves in free agency. That defensive backs, I think it'll be a better defense this year. The offense didn't really lose much pieces, so I do think this is another run back year for the Lions to make the playoffs and win this division. I do think the season ended up being pretty close between at one point Green Bay was in the lead of the division, but the Lions do end up getting it. So shout out to Detroit. And then the 49ers get the 3 seed at 11-6. 49ers I don't think are going to be as good this year, but I think they will be a very good team. You got the wide receiver core, you got Brock Purdy, but the defense I just don't trust, as we saw at the end of the year last year, plus losing some pieces in free agency. But I do think the Niners will end up being the winner of that division and as a 3 seed. Then we got the Bucs winning the division again at a 9-8 record. That's the worst record to make the playoffs this year. But the Bucs, I think, are well deserved to be a playoff team with that Baker Mayfield QB. I think he does have a solid year again. Not like a wow year, but a pretty good year. And then you got that defense who, you improved a little bit. The wide receiver core, you still got Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, so it's still a very good team. Not much a lot different from last year. I think they'll be a solid team. And then we got the Cowboys finishing at 5, missing the wild card round. I do think that they're in this cluster between Dallas, Seattle, and Green Bay. I do think they're the worst team of those 3, but still a good team with Dak Prescott. They lost a lot of pieces in the offseason as well, though, especially on that defensive end of the ball and the O-line. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes, but we'll see with Mike McCarthy. I think the Cowboys do have talent for sure to make the playoffs in the NFC, but it's a very interesting team for sure. Then the Seahawks at 6. Geno Smith, I think, has a good year. They improved that defense quite a bit, especially with Mike McDonald. I think he'll be a great coach for Seattle. The interior of the O-line really worries me for the Seahawks, but they did draft Christian Haynes, so we'll see what happens with Seattle. I'm a Seahawks fan, so I'm a believer in this team. I think Geno Smith has a good year. I think they finish at 6. Then the Packers at 7, another team that kind of struggled to end the year, but I do still trust Jordan Love and the Packers. I think was honestly a surprise for me to have them at 10-7. I think they do have a good year as well, but they're a very young team still. You got to still have patience with all that. New defensive coordinator in there. I know Joe Barry, I've never been a fan of, but it's still something to think about. But yeah, Green Bay's still a good team. Jordan Love's a really good player. I think he'll have another good year here for Green Bay. So I like the Packers. All right, but then the rest of the teams here, we got the Bears and Caleb Williams finishing 9-8, just barely missing out of the playoffs. Falcons with Kirk Cousins, a little bit of a hotter take, but I don't like the Falcons this year. I do think they end up 8-9. Just not a fan of Kirk, honestly. Well, I'm a fan of Kirk, but coming off the injury, I'm not as big on him as a lot of people are. I think it'll be an interesting team, and it just seems like the Falcons always disappoint, and I'm not going to go against that trend for the Falcons. Rams, I don't think are as good of a team, especially losing Aaron Donald. You can't count out Sean McVay always, but as a Seahawks fan, it's honestly hopeful wishing that I think the Rams struggle this year, and I think they do wind up finishing 8-9, but still, with Matthew Stafford, it should be a competitive team. Then the Vikings finishing 8-9. It's J.J. McCarthy's first year. Justin Jefferson's still there. The defense is there. I think it'll be a team that's very in the mix to make the playoffs with that defense with Brian Flores making improvements. But I do think they wound up just barely missing. All right, and then we have the Saints at 7-10. I've said it year in and year out. It's time to rebuild New Orleans. I don't see you doing anything this year. Then Panthers finishing at 6-11. Hot take, but I think Bryce Young and this Panthers team are going to take some steps. Bryce Young will be much better. They've completely retooled this offense and got a new coach. I think they'll be a solid team for the Panthers. Well, not a solid team, but much better than last year. 6-11 is a better mark to hit. All right, and then the Cardinals also finishing 6-11. Cardinals are kind of a wild card team. I could see them being a very good team and surprising, but still a lot of work to do on the defensive end of the ball. But Kyler Murray, he could very ball out with Marvin Harrison as well in that Cardinals team. And then the Giants 5-12. Don't expect too much from Daniel Jones and the Giants. Kind of a gap year for them to figure things out. And then the Commanders up 4-13. Not the biggest fan of the Jaden Daniels pick, but we'll see what happens with that for the Commanders. All right, so that is that. So let's get into the playoff predictions now. And let's just start out with the AFC side. We got the Jets taking on the Ravens. That would be an interesting matchup. You got Lamar. You got, let me just I guess you're going to have to watch that. Okay, sorry, that ad down there. But anyway, yeah, you got Lamar. You got versus Aaron Rodgers. You got that defense for the Ravens. It's a very good team. You better believe it that those Jets fans are going to show up if their team has a home game in the playoffs. That'll be a crazy environment to see. But this is an interesting one. I really like that Jets defense. I just don't know about a very old Aaron Rodgers versus a prime Lamar Jackson. I think that does come down to the QB in this game. The two very solid defenses. Ultimately, though, I trust Lamar a little more than I do Aaron Rodgers with the unvariables. Lamar Jackson just finished as a 1 seed last year. I think he gets it done on the road. Give me the Ravens to win that. Texans versus Colts. This is just one of the 3 division rivalry matchups we have in the first round, which is exciting of this playoffs. But Texans versus Colts, this would be a fun matchup. I wonder if these two just barely played. No, they played a while ago. I had the Colts and Texans splitting. But yeah, I mean, how can you not like an Anthony Richardson versus a CJ Stroud showing? You got CJ Stroud, the young QB, with his playoff experience from last year, that DeMeco Ryans led defense as well, versus this Colts team, who obviously with Anthony Richardson, I think is going to have a very good year. That wide receiver core, you got to go to Houston, though, which it will be tough to do. Ultimately, though, CJ Stroud has that playoff experience. DeMeco Ryan has that playoff experience under his belt, unlike the Colts coach. Stefanski. No, that's the Browns. I'm forgetting the Colts coach's name. Sorry, but you know who I'm talking about. I do like the Texans, though, to get this done with Stephon Diggs and that roster. It's just too good, in my opinion, for the Colts to win that. All right, we got the Dolphins taking on Cincinnati. 2 versus a 7 seed matchup. Joe Burrow and the Bengals. Who knows what's going to happen after this year with that team? They got a lot of salary cap issues, so this might be their run to get that Super Bowl for Joe Burrow. And you got the Dolphins, who also have very high stakes as well, with Tua's contract extension coming up. You got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, big weapons there. So, and Mike McDaniel, big, need to get that playoff win under his belt, that's for sure. It's very tough, though, to go into Cincinnati with that defense for the Bengals, which has always been underrated. That with Joe Burrow, who in my opinion is the second best QB in the league when healthy. It's just too difficult for me to pick the Dolphins to win that game. I do think Tua, if they can have a good game, they could have a chance. But that's just a tough matchup for them. I got to go with the Cincinnati Bengals to beat the Dolphins. All right, we got the Cowboys facing the Buccaneers. Baker Mayfield playing spoiler to another NFC East team last year in the Philadelphia Eagles, if you remember that game. But the Cowboys with Dak Prescott, they're an interesting team heading into the playoffs. Got to go down to Tampa Bay, which is a tough environment. That'll be an interesting one, but Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Buccaneers offense with Baker Mayfield and those weapons, that defensive backroom's not bad for the Dallas Cowboys, but they're going to really need to rely on Mike Parsons to get after the QB in this one, which is Baker Mayfield's. It's an interesting matchup. I don't think they're the best coaching matchup either with Mike McCarthy and Todd Bowles. But this is a tough one, honestly, guys. I could go either way. I think I'm going to go with the Bucs, honestly. I think they have a little bit more of an experienced roster, honestly. And Baker Mayfield's a good QB. The moves Dallas made in the offseason just gives me worry for them again to disappoint. And I think that does happen. So I got the 4-seeded upset with the Bucs moving on past Dallas. All right, Niners, Seahawks, an NFC West rivalry game. We saw this playoff matchup a couple years ago. This would be a fun one to see again. I think the Seahawks are going to be a very much more solid team this year than they were last year under Mike McDonald, even though it only yields one win better. It's tough to win in the NFL. So, but yeah, you got Brock Purdy and the Niners down there in Levi's Stadium. That would be a tough environment to go in and play in if you are the Seahawks and Geno Smith. It's just a little too much. As a Seahawks fan, I really want to go with the Seahawks. I would for sure be rooting for them. Obviously, I'd be on not watching it, but yeah, I'd for sure be rooting for them. I just can't see it, though. I got to go with the Niners, with Brock Purdy, and that offense is just too explosive. It's a very young defense still for Seattle. Their time will come. The Niners' time, I think, is fastly approaching to end here. But yeah, I got to go with the Niners in this playoffs. And then the Lions versus Green Bay, a 2 versus a 7. And the Packers, or sorry, did I say Seahawks? I meant Packers-Lions. Yeah, I mean, what an interesting matchup again this year. You got Green Bay versus Detroit. I mean, it's just been the Packers, I think, wanted a better seed, but still a good team. If we take a look, yeah, these two split the season series. This is an interesting one, man. I could see an upset. I didn't really have a big upset besides maybe the Bucs in this first round. The Lions are a good team, though. Very much hard to see Jared Goff losing in the first round against this kind of a team. Honestly, though, my gut is kind of going with Green Bay. I'm going to go with a big upset here, guys. I'm going to go with the Packers. Jordan Love, I think, I would be rooting for the Lions in this game. I think they deserve it, but the defense is very solid for the Lions, but that Packers defense, I think, is going to be much better this year now that Joe Barry is gone. I know they kind of struggled to finish off the year, but I think Jordan Love has another outstanding playoff game, and I think this one's going to be a classic, but let's go with an upset. I'm going to go with the Packers to win that one. And even though I'm very high on the Lions, I think they're probably the best team in this whole conference. I think they do come up empty-handed there. Give me the Packers. Okay, let's get to the second round. Interesting matchups here. We got the Texans versus Bengals. 3 versus a 2 seed. That would be a fun one. Bengals just beat the Dolphins, and Texans beat the Colts in the first round. So you look at C.J. Stroud and the Texans. Lost in the divisional round last year. They got a really good team. We got the Joe Burrow-led Bengals team and that defense. That wide receiver core, very solid defense for the Bengals. And then the Texans, who have a A solid defense, but a very inexperienced defense. And this one's being played in Cincinnati. I got to go Joe Burrow and the Bengals. It's just very difficult for me to see C.J. Stroud beating Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. That Texans roster is still very young. Their time will still come. This Texans team honestly reminds me kind of that Bengals team when Joe Burrow went to that Super Bowl run. I do think it kind of comes to an end, though. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins will have a great playoff run. If Joe Burrow's healthy, I think that this team is AFC Championship bound. But then we got the Ravens versus the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes taking on Baltimore. Revenge tour for Lamar Jackson and the Ravens here. How much better does it get than that? That defense, like I said, I think is going to take a step back this year for the Ravens, but I think it will still be very solid. I think this Ravens team will learn from that loss last year from the Chiefs. And I'm going to pick against Patrick Mahomes here. I know it's very tough to do that, and probably going to look like an idiot for doing that, but when you take a look at this, Lamar Jackson, I trust him to have an actual good playoffs this year. I know it's being played in Kansas City. I know the Chiefs are the 1 seed, but Lamar Jackson's a great QB. I think he showed why he was the MVP last year. I think he can finally take that step this year and advance on to the AFC Championship game. I know it's a very tough task, but I think they will get that done. So give me the Ravens in the upset over Kansas City. All right, we got the NFC side of things. The Bucks taking on the Niners. Interesting matchup between Brock Purdy and Baker Mayfield. But that Niners D line against that Bucks O line is going to be a very pivotal factor in this game. Whoever wins that battle arguably could win this entire game if these two meet. But yeah, I mean, you look at this Niners offense, it's just more explosive than the Buccaneers offense is, and it's being played in Levi Stadium. All that being said, I just don't see the Bucks getting that one done, but I think it could be a closer game than a lot of people anticipate. All right, we got 7-seeded Green Bay Packers taking on the Eagles. Eagles at a 12-5 record, winning this their division and winning the conference. So congrats to them. This is no easy task. This is not your typical 7 seed. Jordan Love and the Packers last year were the 7 seed. They made it to this time and almost beat the Niners. Jalen Hurts and the Eagles is a very good team. I really like that defense, how they improved this year. But what worries me is that coaching staff for the Eagles. I just don't know how it's going to look this year with Vic Fangio and that defense. And we obviously know the woes they had that last year. So it's interesting. They got all the talent in the world. Honestly, though, I like the young experience of Jordan Love. I think if they can beat the Lions in the first round, they're going to get past the Eagles, too, in a big game there. So I like the Packers to get the win over Philly and advance on with that young defense, shutting down Jalen Hurts a little bit in this game, and Jordan Love balling out. Give me the Packers. And also, I can't get out of my mind how the Eagles looked in last year's playoffs. That was just atrocious from them. All right, we got the NFC and AFC championship games. Interesting matchups. Ravens, Bengals, and Niners, Packers. Fun matchups, if I do say so myself, but let's start out with the AFC side. Bengals, Ravens. You got Joe Burrow. You got the Bengals. Very good team. Taking on Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. These are two very hungry QBs to try and get their Super Bowl. Remember, this game's being played in Cincinnati, which is very fun for sure. And then you got Lamar Jackson and that Ravens team. I do think the QBs will be very even in this game. It'll be a battle for sure. But you look at throughout the career, Joe Burrow has shown up in the playoffs and won. Lamar Jackson's kind of come up short. That's honestly a big factor. And honestly, I think the Bengals defense is just as good as that Ravens defense, if not better. At Cincinnati, I think that's going to be too difficult for Baltimore to get it done. Give me the Bengals in the win. All right, Packers taking on the Niners. Seems like we always have this matchup whenever these two are in the playoffs. We got it again. Green Bay, San Francisco, and the Packers seem to never get over this hump. Can Jordan Love and Green Bay figure it out this time around? That's the question. Brock Purdy and the Niners are a very good team, as we know. That defense is very good. That offense is obviously explosive, but the pieces, I think this depth for the Niners is a very big concern, and depth is critical as we get to the ending point of the year. Meanwhile, for the Packers, I think they have some of the best young depth in the league. That could be a factor in this game if you think about it. Then the Packers are a 7 seed. So for them to go to the Super Bowl would be huge. And honestly, I trust Jordan Love more than I do Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy got honestly lucky that they pulled that off last year, that they won that. I think that Jordan Love and the Packers get their revenge, and Green Bay moves on to the Super Bowl, where they will take on the Bengals. Bengals, Packers, a 2 seed and a 7 is a very interesting Super Bowl. You got Joe Burrow, you got Jordan Love. Two very big rising QBs of this generation. Packers, though, very young team. It'll be very difficult for them to continue their run in the Super Bowl. This Bengals team, like I said, this is their year, in my opinion, to get things done and win the championship. Because after this, who knows what's going to happen with that roster. It can honestly, with that defense, they can lose a lot of pieces. Also, that offense, they can lose T. Higgins, perhaps. And that O-line could kind of get dismantled. So, the Packers, I don't think will have enough here. I think the Bengals roster overall is better. That's why they're a 12-5 team compared to a 10-7 type team. So, I do have to wound up going with the Packers. And let's just take a look at the draft order. I wonder where the bracket is. Usually it shows there's the bracket. So yeah, there's the bracket as we end this. You got some interesting, games there, especially in that wild card round. Really like the matchups in that round. And the divisional round, yeah, Eagles, Packers, I think would be a showout. Bengals, Texans. But I do wound up going with the Bengals, with both 1 seeds falling in the first round of the divisional round of the playoffs. All right, guys. Thank you all for watching. Like I said, this is my last video. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. I will see you guys in 2 years. So anyway, guys, peace out.